Welcome back, everyone. We'll now have a public hearing on a resolution to set FY22 property tax credit for income tax offset. Council consideration is scheduled for May 17th. Persons who wish to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business on May 11th. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Ms. Kennedy, could you please call on our speaker?
Yes, we do have one speaker for this public hearing today, Louis Willen. Mr. Willen, you have 2 minutes to speak and you can begin when you're ready.
Okay, good afternoon, Council President Hucker and members of the County Council.
Good afternoon.
You already have my written testimony, but I want to point out a few items. I've been nagging the County Council about this issue for many years without success, so you might wonder why I'm back. It's because it was discovered late last year that Baltimore City has been using the homestead credit verification status to determine eligibility for the income tax offset credit since 2012, and they've had zero problems. I've checked with their tax people, zero problems. Hence, the objections in the 2016 Drummer-Sesker analysis attached to my written testimony should be moot. The other reason that I'm testifying again is because several of you were not members of the County Council when I testified about this issue, so you might not even be aware that tens of thousands of landlords are improperly receiving the income tax offset credit each year. My last point, the County Finance Office is currently using a largely manual, tedious process to remove the ITOC from a fraction of the rental properties. It's minimally effective. Just take a look at real estate listings of properties for rent, and you'll find endless properties that have been receiving the ITOC year after year in spite of the Finance Department's efforts. Meanwhile, the state is providing all of the data that the county needs to entirely automate the process with great accuracy. So the city is using the state's data. There's really, Montgomery County should really do the same thing. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you for taking time to listen to my testimony and to read my written testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That is all we have for this public hearing.
Thank you so much, Louis. The public hearing is now closed. We'll now sit as the District Council for a work session on the Ashton Village Center sector plan. I have to call on Fed Chair Reamer to report the committee's recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I will turn it to council staff, or certainly before we do, invite council members to make any comments. Very broadly, we worked really hard on this plan. There was a high level of very focused community participation over a long period of time. I think I first met with community advocates, I don't know, well over a year ago.
Thank you very much.
I'm sort of impressed, but
well, I will turn it to
somebody's may need to mute. And there were a lot of very specific concerns that were raised by community advocates that I think we really did a very, I feel the community recommendation really addresses in a very responsive and yet forward-thinking way. So the ultimate goal here is to facilitate some very nicely managed change in an area of the county that is considered a rural village. I mean, it's the Ashton Rural Village Plan. It's a little bit further, from job centers, and it has a character that has a lot of unique elements from its historic structures, and there's a look and feel to it. And I think the community recognizes that there's going to be some change. And what we have done through this process is try to identify a path forward so that that change brings continuity with the historic aspects of the community that people really cherish. So we're embracing, the need for more housing and the recognition that there's land here that, is very suitable for some additional development. At the same time, we did not, we had some very refined design elements, and it was a very high priority for the community to have a pretty, high level of clarity about those design elements. We did not endorse changes in the road width because people felt like that would change the rural character. So there were a number of different tensions at play. I want to thank Councilmember Navarro, District Council member. She joined us for our discussion. I thought her input was right on the money. And I think what you have before you is a very careful and responsive plan. It may not be 100% of what everybody wanted the way they wanted it. I think there were some disappointments on the developer side. There may be a disappointment or two on the community side, but I think it all adds up to a really a sweet spot. So thanks to the planning board. I see Chair Anderson is on, and I know we'll hear from planning as we proceed. But I think it's a good plan, and I appreciate my colleagues for their work as we chopped our way through it at the committee. And I think the developer came forward with some renderings that were far more responsive to what the community has been seeking than previous versions. And I thought that was very helpful because it just showed some responsiveness to the concerns, and B, it allows us to really establish what we think we're doing here. And I think it's important for us to be kind of public about what we think we're accomplishing, and that'll put the community in a strong position as any applications proceed to kind of refer back to the public record and have a strong foundation for their continued participation. So again, I'll invite my colleagues if they want to share any additional thoughts, and then Chair Anderson and his team, Mr. Pratt, Mr. Duke, and then Pam, we can dive into the packet.
Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councilmember Reamer, Chair of the FED Committee, as well as FED members. I think there has been a theme, especially in some parts of the county. I know District 4 certainly has constantly had to grapple with this notion of how do you balance the desire for more amenities with making sure that we are putting forth responsible development. And in addition to that, of course, is the issue of the housing targets that we have adopted. And so all of these elements come together, and the process that the committee goes through, and the council, in consultation with, of course, the community, in consultation with builders or developers, is how do you find a balance? So how can you facilitate enough redevelopment or development that then warrants and attracts the amenities while respecting what no doubt is a wonderful community. And I do believe that there's been a balance that has been struck. I do think that the work that the FED Committee has done to ensure that there are particular requirements in the plan vis-a-vis design guidelines and where exactly the height should be placed, et cetera, I think is conducive to the type of development that would respect the character and the ethos of that community, and at the same time bring the types of amenities that community members have asked for. And so again, these processes are never easy because it's difficult to please everyone completely, but I feel like there's been quite an improvement made, and think that this would be actually a positive for that part of the county. So again, when I think Chairman Reamer, planning board, members of the FED Committee, the community that came forward and was very specific about their requests and their asks, and were very well organized, and I look forward to supporting the committee's recommendation. Thank you.
Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you. I just want to briefly say, Ashton's a great place. That Ashton Sandy Spring area, I'll get in trouble, but it's one of my favorite areas of the county, and just up the road, a few miles from where Councilmember Navarro and I are, and it's just to Councilmember Reamer's point, so much engagement on this for a long time. And I think the way it landed is a good place. It's going to bring some housing and some restaurants and some unique things out in that area and that little section of Ashton at that intersection there. And it'll also respect the nature of the community. And I think we struck a good balance. It's not easy, but I just want to thank all the people who were engaged. Thank Seamus on my team and all of our central staff. And over the last year, it was a long process, but I think we landed in a good place. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had some questions. I didn't know if we were getting a presentation first or what the order was. Were we just planning on voting or what?
I was just going to invite council members who wanted to make any prefatory comments to do so now, and then we would do the packet.
Yeah, I'll hold off until after the presentation, and then I have a few questions.
Okay, so Ms. Dunn.
Good afternoon. I don't know if the planning chair or the planning director wanted to just say a couple words before we dive into the packet.
Only that I think like hearing about the idea that this plan in many ways exemplifies some of the ideas that are in the Thrive Montgomery plan, specifically the idea of complete communities. I think that Councilmember Navarro hit it on the head. This is about balancing the desire and the need to fill in some of the missing pieces of some of various communities within the county, whether that means different kinds of housing, perhaps the addition of some local serving retail. In some cases, it may mean transit service of some kind. In this case, it means taking a rural village and not trying to turn it into downtown Bethesda or Rockville or Silver Spring, but to recognize that it would benefit from the addition of a more diverse range of housing types, as well as Councilmember Juando had said, maybe an additional restaurant or two. Those are sort of things that can, that's what we mean when we say we're in the general plan, we're looking to create more. And I think that this presents an example of that kind of approach. And so I just wanted to direct your attention to that because I think that it illustrates that the idea of moderate intensification of development is appropriate without changing the basic character of a place. Not everything has to be turned into an urban area, a central business district or a town center in order to benefit from growth in ways that can diversify the range of amenities and resources that are available to people in a community.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. Director Wright, welcome to everybody. Ms. Dunn.
Hi, good afternoon. As we're going to go through the packet, I'm going to do some summaries. I will highlight things for the council, and of course, I will note all of the committee recommendations. But as we go through the packet, I understand Councilmember Albornoz that you may have some questions or statements. So I'm going to, as I go through it, I'll definitely look up, and we'll try to take a pause anytime we reach a place where, you have a question or a concern about whatever it is we're covering. But as we've already been stating this morning, it sounds like everyone knows where the Ashton Village Center sector plan area is. It is really focused on that crossroads at New Hampshire Avenue and Route 108. It is not just the area that is the crossroads. That is going to be referred to this morning as we go through the packet and as the plan was developed as the village core. But it also has a residential edge and then a rural buffer. We're going to cover all of those areas. And as we move through the packet, and what you'll see is that the plan starts out making broad recommendations that are area-wide for the plan area. And then toward the end of the packet, what you'll see is that the plan narrows down and then makes specific recommendations, zoning recommendations for each of the neighborhoods that I just mentioned, the village core, the residential edge, and the rural buffer. And so we'll cover those later in the packet when we get to the more specific recommendations. So on page 2, you'll see that there are some area-wide recommendations related to land use and zoning. And what that really boiled down to was a recommendation to make some modifications to the Sandy Spring Ashton Village overlay zone. And so the committee went through each of those recommendations. They really were about making some modifications that were in combination with the zoning changes that were going to happen, the broad use category of a CRN zone, which has many fewer uses that are allowed than the CRT zone. But then that by doing that recommendation of reducing the zoning from CRT to CRN, they could actually remove some of the things that were in the overlay zone that were specific to uses. So it really was an updating of the way that the overlay would be used in this area, but it did retain some of the things that are the most important to, I think, the community and to the planning department, which were to retain the site plan review of development projects in the area. So the committee, on the day that we reviewed this, we had council members Reamer and Friedson were sitting, and they both unanimously agreed to the planning board's recommended changes to the Silver Spring or Sandy Spring overlay zone. There's any questions there. The next was a chapter that's on community design recommendations, and these are the broad ones. These are design recommendations that you see in almost every master plan that comes before you, but in different formats. And they're like what we think of as the 30,000-foot level way of looking at a community and making a design recommendations. These aren't super specific, and we will cover those ones later, and they are in the chapter 5 called Design Guidelines. These are the bigger, broader ones. There are several of them. They're on page 3 of the staff report. And again, the committee spent many minutes going through each one of these and talking about them. And where they landed was that they also were in concurrence with what the planning board was recommending in this section. Now, they did receive some testimony really looking at one of the graphics that's included in the plan. It's a figure on page 39. And there's been a recommendation to make a modification to that figure to make it a little more readable and to remove a reference to it that was in the 8th bullet under this community design section. Those were unanimous recommendations by the committee. If there's any questions on that?
Thank you. This is more of a general statement, and I know we're going to get into the specifics, but this is more general. Just the designs are great. They really are beautiful, and I just from 30,000 feet do want to acknowledge the great work of the planning board staff. I know this has been years in the making, and I do commend the Fed committee for going through these and trying to find as many compromises as possible, both on the developer side and the community side. And I did have an opportunity, as I'm sure a number of my colleagues did as well, who are not members of the Fed committee, to meet both with members of the community as well as the developer. And, you know, we're in a lot of these meetings, and I was really struck by the very reasonable tone and the you know, I felt inbounds concerns that were still outliers from some of the community members who came and spoke to me about this. And I also very much appreciated what I felt was an authentic and deliberate effort by the developer to adhere to what makes that community so special and that rural aspect of it, trying to acknowledge, though, to adjust and evolve with the times and wanting the additional retail amenities. And one thing that struck me was the community was pretty clear. They understood that you had to have both the housing as well as the retail in order to make the economics of this work. They were not unreasonable about that. And I've had meetings before with other communities that maybe had a vision that wasn't quite realistic. But I think one of their general concerns, and that's why I'm bringing it up now with regards to design, and you know, this has been in the last 2.5 years, learning land use and zoning, and the ZURM zone text amendment has become synonymous. And it has been one of those learning curves I've really appreciated and have learned like something every 5 minutes whenever we discuss one of these. But I think one of the community concerns, and there are two others that I'm going to bring up later, is that, you know, is there any chance of a bait and switch? You know, I know, and I spoke to the chairman, and they have pushed forward guidelines that are as strong as they feel they can reasonably make them. But when push comes to shove, are the renderings that were showed to the community truly what we end up with, you know, several years from now, once the financing is aligned and the permits are secured and, you know, shovels start to hit the ground? is what was promised really going to be delivered? And I know that we can't entirely answer that, but I would appreciate, just from 30,000 feet, if the planning board staff could just provide any assurance to the community above and beyond, I know, the numerous meetings that you've had and numerous conversations we've had, that, you know, as we move to the final phase of this project moving forward, and I'm confident this is going to pass today, that those beautiful renderings that the community saw will stay consistent.
So I can perhaps address that for the record, Wood Wright, Planning Director. We were also very concerned about making sure that the vision in this plan would be something that could be realized when we get to the development review and regulatory stage. We have had other plans where the execution has not lived up to the vision in the master plan. It was for that reason that we have done some of the most detailed design guidelines in the plan and this was a big discussion at the Fed committee, you know, with some specific numbers and targets for building width and height and so on. We feel confident that the language in the plan is strong enough that when it is going to be reviewed in the future by the staff who's with us today, many of them will probably still be here when the regulatory cases come forward, or by future staff who you know, may not be sitting in on this hearing today but will be reading the plan. We really do feel confident that we have put enough specificity into the plan that we'll get the outcomes that we are hoping for and that the plan vision calls for. It may not look exactly like the renderings. I hope, honestly, it ends up looking even better than the renderings that we've seen. And then as we go through the design review process, there will be many opportunities to actually, you know, look at the amenities and look at the design and actually make it an even better project than what's currently contemplated. But I definitely think the language is strong enough such that it will not end up being a problem or being something that's not consistent with the vision of the plan.
I appreciate that. And I guess the next question for Ms. Dunn, you know, you have the opportunity to look at a lot of these. Is the language as tight as you think it needs to be, and is it tighter than it is in some other plans that we've seen, acknowledging wanting to adhere to this rural aspect of this beautiful area that we want to, you know, keep in spirit? Just if you could shed any light on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, when I was reviewing the plan and making my recommendations to the committee, some of the things that struck me were some of the things that Director Wright just mentioned. There is some specificity with regard to numbers, specific widths of building for massing, definitions for what a multiplex housing unit, how many units it would contain, how large a stoop can be. Those are very specific things, and they actually gave me pause that if things were to change over time, different building practices might not want to adhere to those things because they can build something different that is better but might be slightly out of those ranges. Did we really want these guidelines in a plan and that specific? And where it boiled down was the committee and the planning department said, yes, we really do want to be that specific and we do want them in the plan. This is our pledge to the community that by retaining these in the plan and retaining this level of specificity, that they have the best guarantee that they're going to get the type of rural village that they've been talking about and envisioning. So while I was a little concerned that these things were so specific within the plan, I think it is guaranteeing to the community and to everyone that they actually will help bring about a vision and a realization of what people have been talking about. So
that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I think if we're moving past the sort of broad chapter 3 look at design. Well, the next area that's covered in the plan is transportation. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Orland for a minute.
Good afternoon. There's a lot of things in the plan there's absolutely no disagreement on. Very good elements that have been added in terms of bikeway improvements, sidewalks, vision, zero improvements in transit. One of the things that we always look at in plans, of course, is balance between transportation and land use. And in November, when you approved the growth and infrastructure policy, you changed some of the aspects of how that balance is actually calculated. In Ashton, because it's part of a green area, the standard green policy area, the standard is what's called 1,350 critical lane volume. So one of the things that we look for in the plan is the planning balance, and there hadn't actually been an analysis of that. So I asked the planning staff to look at what the traffic generation would be from the development that's proposed in the plan, as well as some growth in traffic from the region, because actually most of the traffic on 650 on New Hampshire Avenue and Route 108 actually have nothing to do with Ashton at all. It just goes through. They did that, and what they showed was that in the morning rush hour, even the longer term future, it's not going to be a problem. In the evening, however, it does show that it would exceed the standard. And so in the growth and infrastructure policy that you approved in November, you said that in areas outside of the red areas, in other words, yellow, orange, and green, including Ashton, that improvements can actually be made to an intersection. But the first thing that should be tried is transportation demand management. And the next thing is operational improvements, which is changing the traffic signal timing, changing the allocation of how lanes are used, lane configuration. So left turn lane becoming left through lane, that sort of thing. And only as a last resort, looking at adding turn lane or two. The plan actually in 3 or 4 places says that the intersection of New Hampshire Avenue and 108 should not be widened at all in terms of traffic lane. And I had made the recommendation to take those out because, again, it interfered with the guidance we got in November on the growth and infrastructure plan. And we potentially keep the area out of balance if these other measures didn't solve the problem. However, in the committee meeting, Mr. Reamer and Mr. Friedson, who were there for this part of the meeting, felt otherwise. They agreed with the planning board staff, and the staff to to continue to have the language which would prohibit the adding the lanes. The only changes that they did make were a suggestion I made, that is that the plan should actually have identify what's called a target speed for each of the streets in Ashton, as we have done in the last several master plans. The target speed is the speed at which all aspects of design and operation are going to try to get traffic to go to. And so currently, for example, the speed limits on 108 and 650 is 30 miles an hour. And the target speed I suggested was 25 miles per hour. And the council members agreed with that, and they feel like that should be in the plan. And the other is a relatively minor change. There's a table on page 41 having to do with right-of-way recommendations, but it doesn't really define what the right-of-way is. And so there would be a footnote added which says that right-of-way width reflects what's called minimum right-of-way and may not include right-of-way needed for on-street parking and pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and stormwater management facilities. So, for example, only Sandy Spring Road, Route 108, has a minimum right-of-way width of 80 feet in the plan, but that would not include any other right-of-way that's needed for on-street parking, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, or stormwater management facilities. Those are the recommendations from the Committee on Transportation. Otherwise, they agree with the final draft plan. And there was, I guess, one more piece when you get talking about the village core neighborhood, where there was a recommendation about a particular chart in the plan, which we'll get to, I guess, a little later.
Mr. President.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. So I just wanted to observe the projection for future traffic. Looked at the wider area and finds that future traffic is basically expected to grow with the population. That was kind of my read of what that analysis showed. And so this is where you kind of get into the tension of these different policies. The projected traffic really didn't have much to do with this particular development. It's regional, as Glenn said. And, should we transform this intersection at the heart of this rural village plan area? Should we transform that to promote greater?
That as we add density there, that, obviously it's going to impact the quality of life of the people that purchase these homes very significantly, because getting to and from home when they want to get home is going to be a lot more difficult than they would like for it to be. And they also mentioned, there's other community events, like football is a big deal in that part of the community. And on Friday nights, you got a fair amount of traffic flowing to and from that area as well. So it's not just, morning and evening traffic. There's real life community engagement issues there. So I don't have a solution here, and I'm inclined to go with the committee recommendation because I don't have anything to counter it. But it is something that we are going to have to very closely look at moving forward, because if you look at some communities in Clarksburg as an example that were very rural in nature when they were developed, it sometimes takes some members of a community, a completely unreasonable amount of time to just be able to turn into their street. And so it is something that, and I'd love actually the planning board's input on this, because the other thing to acknowledge here, there's one bus route that services this area. We're not talking about smart growth here. And we're all trying to adhere to the spirit of this being a rural community, which we are celebrating as a significant positive. And I agree with Councilmember Jawando. It's one of my favorite places to visit as well, because it's so pristine and gives you just a sense of escape on some level, which is why people move there in the first place. So I guess I'd love some feedback and input on what solutions we can look at moving forward, because I think, not doing something isn't really a solution, particularly, for these kinds of areas. And while on paper and from 10 or 15,000 feet, it may seem that this is manageable, the folks that actually live in these communities would disagree often.
If I can just comment, and now I'm going to show my age a little bit and share with you that probably 20 years ago, when we were planning the ICC, we had lots of meetings with people who lived on 108. And believe it or not, the traffic was actually worse on 108. And they were very concerned about some of the impacts that the ICC could potentially have on their community. But the one thing that they thought would be a benefit was that it offers a alternative parallel route to much of 108, and that it could and should lessen the traffic on 108. And my understanding is when the ICC was built, it did have an impact. It did lessen some of the traffic on 108. It's always, though, a choice of, do you drive on a road for free, 108, to get east-west, or do you pay a toll to be on the ICC, which, again, takes you almost exactly to the same locations that 108 does. And I think that the sad reality is that the traffic on 108 does need to get to sort of a point where people say, I'm going to use the other route. So I guess, which is the ICC. So I guess my comment is that we have actually thought about a solution and an alternative, and it was called the ICC. And it actually does run parallel to 108. It runs in almost exactly the same places. It takes you to the same places that 108 does, but it hasn't been as heavily used yet because it costs money. So I don't know. I certainly think adding some transit, adding some additional bus service is a great option, but I do think that we did the big move already, which was adding a parallel road. very large parallel road.
So you anticipate it's going to get so bad that people are going to be forced to take the ICC? Is that basically what you're saying, Director Wright?
Well, that they'll make a choice that if they don't like the traffic on 108, that they will get onto the ICC and pay the toll, and it will be a little more expensive, but a little faster.
Could I just interject, though? I don't think we project that traffic is going to be that terrible on 108, do we?
No. It's all a matter of degree. We aren't talking about gridlock at all. In fact, and I don't know if Dr. Orland's still on, I mean, the lack of balance was within a relatively small amount, even in the evening rush. It wasn't, it wasn't a enormously gridlock kind of projection. It was a bit above the projected minutes at each intersection.
That's correct. I mean, in the standard itself, because it's in a rural area, 1,350 critical lane volume. Boy, if we were able to achieve that down county, we'd think, oh, there's no problem at all. So it's really also a matter of context. And in the lead up to the plan, the planning board staff had a workshop with the community. And one of the things they complained about was the intersection at New Hampshire Avenue, and this was in 2019, the intersection of New Hampshire Avenue and 108 was had too much heavy traffic, too much delay. And they did also talk about how hard it is to get in and out of the road. But in context with the rest of the county, it's really not that bad. And the ICC did make a difference when it opened. It still makes a difference. It doesn't really go quite the same location as the ICC does. To the west, to the east, it goes to western, central and western Howard County. It doesn't go to the eastern Montgomery County. And then, of course, continuing on 108 goes to Olney and then continues over to Laytonsville and the Gaithersburg area. So, but there is some overlap. I don't disagree with Ms. Wright saying about that if things get too difficult on 108, some of the traffic might end up more choosing the ICC just because for their particular origins and destinations, it might work better. The concern I had raised was not to say that we want to have additional lanes at New Hampshire Avenue 108. It's just not to preclude that option if the worst situation comes up. It's a last resort. Again, the growth and infrastructure policy says clearly that in a situation like that, there are other methods you should try first to see if you can make it work, and then only then do you go to the idea of adding a turn lane. And it may or may not ever happen because forecasts aren't always right, as of course we all can recognize. So it really is more of the ability to leave open the option. It doesn't say, the plan wouldn't say the plan should add turn lanes at these intersections that we have in some other plans.
May I make a final comment? I suspect if we called to widen that intersection, I suspect that there would be quite an outcry. You know, it has a pretty significant impact on the feel of the area. And people would say it would become much more of a sort of bland suburban intersection. And so I don't know that there's like an easy option here. And what we opted for was something that kept true to the overall vision of preserving the rural character, recognizing that the projected increase of traffic was marginal. It relates to the growth of the population. And as Glenn said, there's far less traffic at this intersection than, if you rank the top intersections, this would be very low. This would be at the bottom of the top intersections. So, would the community really prefer that we widen this intersection? I don't think so. And so, it just felt like that was the right now. To Glenn's point, we just left it out because we were concerned that in the development application at this corner, we would end up with perhaps MCDOT would come in and say, well, we've run the numbers and you have to add in a turn lane. And we just didn't want to see that happen. So, and according to planning, that is a legitimate concern. So we just wanted to tighten it up and ensure that, again, expectations were going to be fulfilled, and there wasn't something, there wouldn't be something that came to fruition during the development process that was contrary to what we were telling the community we were going to be delivering to them. So we're trying to be transparent that there is a projected small increase of traffic over time. Again, it's due to population, and that's the world that, I guess, that's the way the world's going.
Okay, I don't have I don't have a specific proposal or an amendment here. I think this is a healthy discussion generally, because we're going to have having a similar conversation in lots of other ways over the coming years. But I appreciate us doing it in the open, and that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. It's done.
Yes, thank you. All right, so we're now going to move past the transportation section. If you're following along in the staff report, at the very bottom of page 6, it's the recommendations and the plan that are made for open space, trails, and public facilities. The first thing to note is that within the plan area, there are no county-owned parks within the boundary, although Ashton is served by some privately owned open spaces and some publicly owned parks that are at its edges, so just outside the plan boundary. The lack of open space within the plan area where the community can gather, can enjoy open space together as a community, was really called out in the planning board draft as something they wanted to address and something that the community is very interested in. And so while there are several recommendations related to open space that are on page 7 of the staff report, the ones that I'll call out to you are that, new development in the southeast quadrant of 108 and 650 New Hampshire Avenue really is calling for a publicly accessible green area, green space for the community to have as a gathering space. And just below that is another recommendation to provide a linear park that would connect that civic green space within the quadrant out to the roadway. And also to designate a small open space at that intersection, also in the southeast quadrant, right where there are some significant trees that exist today that the community would like to see preserved. So those were all things that are provided. They're part of some other recommendations, but they really get to this idea that one quadrant is the least currently developed, but when it does develop, it really the plan is asking for some real amenities for the community to occur here. There's a last bullet on page 7, which says to designate the proposed public open spaces within the Legacy Open Space Functional Master Plan. And just one comment that was made to committee that they agreed with was just to soften that language to say considered designation, because this master plan itself wouldn't make that change. It would be a change that would occur over time, public open space by public open space. And so there was all agreement just to clarify that one last bullet. But in general, then the community didn't really weigh in too much on this, but we did get some testimony from the developer, who is one of the major property owners in the southeast quadrant, stating their intention to provide that civic green and that linear park to the community. And the committee agreed unanimously with the recommendations related to open space. Okay, moving on, there is also a section on trails. One of the main things that happened in the 1998 plan, that was the Ashton Sandy Spring plan that was combined, was really this discussion that the Sherwood school site really could have a trail along it or within it that could connect to the very large parkland just outside of the school property and also outside of the plan boundary. And this plan retains that same recommendation. It would like to see if in the future, working with MCPS and the Parks Department, there can be some connection made there to the larger parkland. So those are the primary recommendations related to trails, and the committee was also on board with those. There was no dissension. With regard to public facilities, the plan actually doesn't make recommendations related to that. In their evaluation of the adequacy of public facilities, everything is adequate with respect to what the plan is proposing, and so no recommendations were needed. Is there any questions? The next section, now I'm on page 8, is really the environmental recommendations in the plan. Approximately 75% of the sector plan area is located either in the lower Patuxent River watershed or what's called the Hollings River watershed. And so the plan really spends some time providing recommendations and information related to environmental site design to control stormwater and prevent runoff in this area. You'll see on page 8 there's a variety of environmental recommendations. And in reviewing these with the committee, they all unanimously supported these recommendations as well.
And just a general comment here, Mr. President.
Mm-hmm. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I just want to, I thought you guys did a really good job in this section. The Office of Legislative Oversight issued a report a couple of months ago that talked about the extensive flooding that's going on in Montgomery County. Now, a lot of that is attributed to climate. And I've had this conversation with Director Wright and Chairman Anderson. But I think that it's something we're all concerned about. And particularly with climate change, we have to be particularly cautious in how we address environmental impacts and other ancillary issues that may arise through development projects and impervious surfaces. I do think it's been addressed pretty extensively in this plan specifically, but that needs to continue to be an extraordinarily high benchmark, maybe even higher than it was 10 years ago, as we look at these, development plans, because we want to set these communities up for success, and not have unintended consequences of flooding in basements, which we're seeing much more frequently than we were before, which is really impacting quality of life and frankly adding all sorts of expenses, and is going to raise insurance premiums in our area at some point. So, just something to keep an eye on, but more of a general comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, continue forward then. So again, like I just said, the committee was unanimous in their support of the planning board's recommendations with respect to these environmental recommendations in the plan. The next are recommendations for historic preservation. And while Ashton had a history of having numerous 19th and 20th century buildings, many of them are since gone. The one resource that is recommended for designation in the master plan for historic preservation is Cloverly. And it is located just north of 108 across from Sherwood High School near the Sandy Spring Museum. And then there are just a few other minor recommendations related to historic preservation, really related to wayfinding signs, implementation of the Heritage Area Management Plan, and continuing to provide information and access to historic information related to the Ashton area. And the committee, again, was in complete agreement in support of the way the plan framed the recommendations for historic preservation. Okay. And so now that we're in not the last section, the very last section really is about implementation, but the next to last session is the one that's focused on the local and property specific recommendations in the plan. And we're going to cover them in 3 neighborhoods, the first being the Village Core neighborhood. So again, we're going to look at those 4 quadrants around that primary intersection. Then we'll talk about the residential edge and then eventually the rural buffer. But in the Village Core, with the 3 quadrants, you can think about there's an overall recommendation, and the overall recommendation was that to have uniform density across all 4 quadrants in the Village Core area, and that density to be 0.5 FAR, which stands for floor area ratio. The zoning is identical in 3 of the 4 quadrants then, the only difference being that in the 1 quadrant, in the southeast quadrant, the height in that zoning designation will be 45 feet, but there is some very specific language in the plan about how and where that 45 feet in height can occur. So if we just for a second step back, we'll focus on the 3 quadrants that are all identical, the southeast, the southwest quadrant, northwest quadrant, and northeast quadrant. You will see on pages 9 and 10 of the staff report, it lays out every single specific recommendation for those 3, what I would think of as recommended for identical zoning quadrants. They currently all today have some commercial development, and some have some housing in them as well currently today. So the real gist is that the current zoning there, the underlying zone is CRT. It will now become CRN, as I said earlier. That's also in conjunction with a revision to the overlay zone. So this is a base zone that will have fewer allowed uses to really continue to have that protective community and village feel to it. Those restriction on uses today come through the overlay, but moving forward, they'll come through the zone. being CRN. Currently today, the zoning is higher. They have a CRT of either 0.75 total FAR in, I think, 2 of these 3 quadrants. In another one, it is 1.25, where the CVS is located. That has a higher density currently today. But the idea being that for consistency and to keep that rural village feel, proposed zoning is a 0.5 total FAR, and it is 0.5 for commercial and residential to provide that real ability to provide flexibility if there is some redevelopment in this area. There are also within these areas specifics on providing sidewalks and side paths and connectivity. The committee went through every one of these recommendations for the full village core, but I'm just as a general saying for the 3 quadrants that are going to be identically zoned and all of those specific recommendations in the plan on pages 8, 9, and 10, the committee was unanimous in support of the planning board's recommendations for this area. Which brings us to the 4th quadrant, which is the one that you do receive the most information from the community on, and it is the one with the potential development in the future, unlike the others, which there is some development potential, but not unlike the southeast quadrant, where today it is the least developed. It is not undeveloped. The Sandy Spring Bank is on the corner there, and the Sandy Spring Bank actually owns quite a bit of that southeast quadrant currently. But it is also a major property owner there is the Nichols Development Corporation, owning much of the R60 zoned property and the RC zoned property in that southeast quadrant. The council received testimony from Francois Carrier on behalf of the Nichols Development Company, supporting the planning board's recommendation for the zoning for the 0.5 FAR and for the 45 degree in height, even with the restrictive language about where it could be located. And the committee spent much time talking about this, and what the committee landed on, at least with regard to height, was to provide even more very specific language in the plan. It was viewed as somewhat general, and so to be much more specific, that 45 degree in height could really only occur interior to that quadrant to take advantage of the natural grade, and that it cannot, 45 degrees or the 45 feet in height cannot be on a building that fronts on New Hampshire Avenue or Route 108. So that while it is a taller height than maybe the community wanted, it is definitely embedded into the interior of that property. And so as somebody traveling through the village core, they will not be seeing very tall buildings that feel overwhelming to the community. So, and that 40 feet in height can really only occur at the intersection and then taper down to 35 feet as you get to the edges, which is the height of a single family detached house.
So can you just describe the issue of the property slope in the back?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's just important to share that if we didn't have the height recommendation the way we did, then presumably the buildings would actually step down in the rear. Whereas, you know, I think we want to allow them to use that extra height that they would get from the slope in the back. So just please, again, because these are sort of confusing issues, explain the height and the different parts of the property and how we set it at the committee.
Sure, I'll give it a shot, and then if the planning staff wants to jump in and do a better job, they're more than welcome to. But what I'll say is, in the interior to that southeast quadrant, the topography does step down, and there is a natural grade that is, you know, a slope. And if you're interior to that area and you were to build, and they do anticipate there being interior roadways and drive aisles and, you know, access points to get into the interior of that quadrant, that if height were restricted to 40 feet, but your interior where it is sloped down, it would be effectively as if it would look like possibly only a 35 or 30 foot height if you were out on the roadway, because again, it is interior and sloping down. And you would measure that height in front of that, at the curb grade in front of those buildings, interior to the site.
Right. So,
really
about how to minimize that visual impact, we allow for more height in the interior of a development and step it down to the front. And so I don't know that there would be a strong logic to say we should have a policy that will result in stepping down in the back. So it just felt like that was the right way to set the height limits. So that's how we got there. And, you know, certainly council members may want to discuss that particular issue.
Member Albanos?
Thanks. So again, you learn something new every 5 minutes in this job. So I learned that you can only categorize these in 5-foot increments. And what the developer actually wants is technically 42.5 feet, not necessarily 45. And the reason they want 42.5 is so that they can add an amenity to those interior homes, which is a rooftop terrace, which have become popular, particularly for these planned communities for folks that don't have backyards, but want to be able to entertain outdoors in some way. So I get the interest in wanting to provide that amenity, which obviously will make these homes more attractive to purchase potentially. But I guess I had a couple questions. One, and again, I'm still a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to land use and zoning. But does this set a potential precedence? And I know there's language that has been placed to provide some guardrails, it sounds like. But does this potentially set a precedence for future development projects in and around that area that would list 45 feet as something that is more achievable or something that other developers may want to strive for? That's just a question.
Well, what I will say, Councilmember Albanaz, is in the other 3 quadrants, the height is limited to 35 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So it is only in this quadrant that developers would be allowed to go to 45. And the way the language has been recommended for the plan, it cannot occur if their buildings front on either of those roadways. So it is really forcing that 45-degree height to be interior to that quadrant. I don't see that it would become a problem for other developers in the area because they don't have the zoning to allow it.
Okay, thank you. And I guess there's some skepticism that's been about the actual slope itself, that it's not maybe as sloped as it's being made out to be. And so that's sort of was a concern that was expressed, that yes, there's a slope, but it's not as significant or pronounced. And I didn't have a chance to walk around that area to confirm that, but would love the planning board staff's feedback and thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm going to put Jamie on the spot. We looked at that very carefully. We actually have a tool on our website where you can look at any property. It's on MC Atlas. You can look at any property in the county and do 2 points, which are being shown. I think if you can see the screen that we're sharing right now. You can pick any 2 points and you can see the actual elevations and the difference in elevation. So we did take a look at this property very specifically. We looked at the point from New Hampshire Avenue to the interior of the site, and there is a significant change in grade, which you can actually see depicted in the image that Jamie is showing right now. And what's, again, sort of exciting is this is available on our website, so anyone can go in and play with this tool and measure the elevation heights anywhere. So, again, Jamie is showing you could pick any a different set of points and do the same kind of checking to see what the slope differentiation is. So we feel there is a significant change in elevation, that I think, Jamie, we're saying it's at least 10 feet, and that would definitely mean a 45-foot tall building would not appear to be 45 feet tall from the street. It would appear to be more like 35 feet tall from the street. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Albanaz?
It does. I think I didn't have as many questions on the density issue. I think just that's helpful. So I don't have anything to propose at this point. I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Councilmember Albanaz, I can offer, this is something I was concerned about as well. The analysis of the tool that planning has up right now, but also the fact that it wouldn't look, with this slope much higher or higher at all than 35 feet. The ZTA that I propose on Missing Middle within communities, within transit, one of the reasons we went with a form-based approach was that the current height, as Ms. Dunn stated, for single-family homes is 35 feet, which would also be the height and proposed in my ZTA. We'll get into that later. But I was sensitive. I bring it up because I was sensitive to that fact, too, of given the type of neighborhood, you didn't want something that was towering. And I think, so I just for what it's worth, to make you, if it makes you feel any better.
Well, it does. I guess, and I, again, appreciate the pains that you guys took in trying to restrict it to a specific component of the development, acknowledging the grade of the slope. And per your chart, the slope is a real slope, which is, helpful to acknowledge as well. And it sounds like you have put guardrails to ensure not just the other elements within this specific development project, but potentially future development projects within the other quadrants, aren't going to go to 45 feet, because that is totally unreasonable in any other area outside of the slope, particularly if we're trying to promote and keep the spirit and character of a rural area. 45 is pretty high. But the other thing that helped too is the developer actually is not going fully to 45, they're going to 42.5. And they stated that to me, so I hope that's accurate. And those 2.5 feet I know aren't significant in the grand scheme of things, but I get, and a lot of the folks have lived in these communities for generations and feel a real sense of wanting to adhere to some of those challenges and issues in character, which I empathize with. So I think you guys have addressed it within reason, given the slope issue, and I appreciate you briefing me on it.
So just give a summary where we are. For the Village Core neighborhood, which we're reviewing, the zoning for 3 of the 4 quadrants is a CRN of a total 0.5 FAR. The commercial FAR would be 0.5, residential FAR would be 0.5, and the height in 3 of the 4 quadrants would be 35 feet. And then we just heard an explanation why in the southeast quadrant, the zoning recommendation again is for CRN, 0.5 FAR, 0.5 commercial, 0.5 residential, with a height of 45 feet, and language added that restricts that 45 feet to interior of that quadrant and will not allow the 45-foot height on any building that fronts on 108 or 650. And that was a unanimous recommendation by the committee. If I don't have any.
Hey, Pam.
Yes.
Pam, Craig Rice here, and I just had a quick question. How is this similar to what we did with Chevy Chase Lakes? Because it sounds awfully familiar to what we did when it came to slope there, and the same sort of discussions around height and not affronting and some of the challenges there. Is it similar in terms of what we did in our approach?
Well, so I wasn't that closely involved with Chevy Chase Lake, so I'm not the best one to ask, and I'm going to turn it to planning staff on that one.
Yeah, I think this is actually even stronger than what we did with Chevy Chase Lake, because I think in that situation, we were expecting sort of one big multifamily building, and it was really about how it would sort of, that big multifamily building would fit into the slope. In this case, we're really talking about individual, either single-family houses, townhouses, duplexes. We're really encouraging this developer to look at a few of the missing middle building types. So we're talking about individual buildings that will be built at different levels rather than having to be built into the slope. But it is similar in the sense of trying to use the topography of a site to lessen the impact of what might be perceived as height.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll move on to the next neighborhood. The next one is the Residential Edge, and this is really located just immediately west of the Village Core and made up primarily of residential developments. The Planning Board draft recommends retaining R90 zoning and townhouse zoning for most of the properties that are currently in that zone, retaining an R200 zone for also part of the properties. It really is about keeping what's there. reconfirmation of existing zoning, and then some recommendations related to sidewalks and side paths. Again, like each of these areas needs much more connectivity for the people that live there to get around. And the committee was unanimously supportive of the recommendations for this neighborhood. And the last neighborhood is called the Rural Buffer Neighborhood, the western half of the plan area, and it serves as a buffer between the village centers of Ashton and Sandy Spring. It includes the Sherwood High School and some other properties that are zoned in a rural neighborhood zone. And the board recommends to just reconfirm this existing zoning, and again, has recommendations related to sidewalks and side paths and connectivity that are important to the people in this area and to the high school in general. And the committee, again, supported these planning board recommendations unanimously. We're okay with all of that. The next section is the design guidelines. And we did hold a second work session related to design guidelines. There were 2 work sessions for the Ashton plan. The first one covered everything you've just covered, and the second work session really was about design guidelines. At the first work session, there was a lengthy discussion about should design guidelines be included in the master plan, or should they be a separate document? And Councilmember Friedson had asked planning to go back and do an evaluation of sort of how do they approach whether or not they bring forward a master plan with the design guidelines in them, or the design guidelines as a separate document. And you'll see on page 14 and 15 of the staff report, it lists a lot of the things that are included in design guidelines, the broad topic areas of the ways in which design guidelines are created to establish rules for things like building type and building placement, massing, architectural embellishments, building materials. It's very specific. It's a lot of stuff about how to keep Ashton a rural village, basically. And it also has some recommendations. The section also has recommendations related to open space and connections, but those aren't within the design guidelines. But anyway, I don't know if planning wants to talk a little bit about, or Councilmember Friedson, sort of what evolved out of that work session. And they did come back with some information related to design guidelines that have sort of gelled what's going to be recommended as a committee unanimously for the design guidelines in the plan.
Happy to have planning staff describe it.
Sure. We appreciated the questions that we got from the Fed committee, and it really helped us go back and take a look at what we've done over the last 15 years or so on various master plans. And we did prepare a memo, which I believe is attached to your packet. And what we tried to explain is that of all the master plans that we have done, we probably are almost evenly split in terms of which have had separate design guidelines and which have had design guidelines integrated into the document. It's on page circle 12, the memo. What it came down to was that, we really believe that the zoning code gives a lot of importance to design guidelines, whether they're in the document or out of the document. And our zoning ordinance says that site plans must be found to substantially conform with the recommendations of the applicable master plan and any guidelines approved by the planning board that implement the applicable plan. So we feel like they really, in a sense, have equal weight. So deciding where to place them is really not a matter of where they'll be the most enforceable, but rather where they make the most sense from the perspective of plan size and complexity. And when we looked at the many master plans that we've done over the last 15 years, and actually it's sort of fun to just even look at the list on page circle 13 of all of the plans, what we really saw is that it really was the larger plans that were covering multiple development sites and a lot of complex design issues that had separate design guidelines. And those guidelines tended to be very long in length. In some cases, 25 to 100 pages in length. The smaller plans covering smaller geographic areas with fewer potential development sites had smaller guidelines in the range of 2 to 10 pages in length, and those generally have been within the master plan. We felt like Ashton falls into that latter category, and but what this has done is given us a good opportunity to sort of write down, you know, I described it as take something that's sort of been implicit and make it explicit and write it down. And so on page circle 15, you'll see what we think should be and what we will be trying to follow as a policy in the future, which is that design guidelines generally will be included in the body of a master plan, except for the following situations: plans that are particularly complex and include multiple potential development sites that require detailed guidance to assure compatible development, plans that require design guidelines that are so detailed and voluminous that a separate document would be most logical from a logistical standpoint, and plans that use special zoning tools that allocate development capacity based upon design review, such as the Bethesda Downtown Plan, which is the first of the plans that we've done with that particular attribute, but there may be more in the future. And so I think that, again, this was a very useful discussion and a useful exercise for all of us to sort of take what had been perhaps an implicit policy and make it explicit. And we have done that, and it again, I think, confirms our recommendation, that is planning staff and planning board, to have the design guidelines within the Ashton plan.
Thank you. So that's just to reiterate, the committee did recommend that the design guidelines remain within the plan for the Ashton Village sector plan, and that's the committee's unanimous recommendation. I skipped one thing that I think Dr. Orland might want to mention. He'd mentioned earlier there was one further recommendation related to transportation. It's on the top of page 15 in the staff report.
Right. This is relatively minor, but actually I'm looking at this one more time, and I think I have another change I'd recommend. But in the design guidelines, there's a sentence which says the size of existing public rights-of-way should not be expanded, ensuring that crossing distances are minimized for pedestrians and that drivers do not speed. DOT had pointed out in their comments that, as I pointed out in my earlier comments to you, that there are other rights-of-way, parts of the right-of-way which is not in the roadway. You could have a separate bikeway, you could have a sidewalk, you could have stormwater management, that sort of thing. And so DOT's proposal was to say, this is in the middle of page 15, the size of existing curb-to-curb distances should not be expanded, ensuring the crossing distances are minimized for pedestrians and the drivers do not speed. Well, it occurs to me, I just checked this, not all the roads on 108 and 650, not all parts of them have curbs on both sides. So there isn't a curb-to-curb distance. I think what you really want to say here is the widths of the existing roadway pavement should not be expanded. And that way I think you captured what the planning board had really intended, and certainly what the committee had intended, and not worry about a situation where you don't have a curb on one or both sides, which happens in actually several places within this plan. So that's my recommendation, to change that language to say the width of the existing roadway pavements should not be expanded, ensuring that crossing distances are minimized for pedestrians and that drivers do not speed.
All right, I'll move that language.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Great, without objection. It's done?
Great. So we're on the very last section. We've covered the design guidelines. They're in the plan. The last is implementation. And typically after every master plan gets adopted, it is going to be followed by a sectional map amendment that will implement the zoning changes. It's also going to be followed with the zoning text amendment that will make the changes to the Ashton Village overlay zone. So that needs to happen as well. But then there's another recommendation that has also gotten a lot of discussion, and it was covered in the committee, and that had to do with the creation of an implementation advisory committee. to have members of the community in the Ashton area be placed on this committee and have them be an integral part of the conversation around development applications and things that go before the planning board, and to have them included in this process as early as possible. That creation of that group and what happens will follow adoption of the plan. And planning can talk about this in more detail, but typically what happens is the planning staff will work closely with the community, and they will draft a resolution that will basically be the enforcement to create this body, and then the council will review that resolution and approve it. And so those usually happen after the plan is adopted. And the committee was unanimously in support of, again, having this implementation advisory committee, and wanted the membership to be as broad as possible. Really, the plan shouldn't signify any particular group that would be involved in this. And again, that is really something that happens as part of the process following the adoption of the plan. Any questions?
This is an important one for the community, so appreciate the specificity here. Thank you very much.
Great.
I think that pretty much covers it.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Dunn, Ms. Wright, everybody on your team. This is Dr. Orland. This is a lot of work and a lot of thought and a lot of community consultation that went into it. Colleagues, we have a committee recommendation before us. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Draw a vote, right?
Yep. Great. Okay, that is unanimous among those present. Okay, don't go anywhere, Ms. Dunn. I'm supposed to call on you for the public hearing announcement.
Yes. Big news. There's going to be a public hearing on Thrive Montgomery 2050, and that public hearing will be on June 17th. It is a Thursday, and it will be in the evening, so we can accommodate speakers than we might typically be able to accommodate at a 3:30 public hearing time. That is being well noticed. I'm working with the central staff assistants who are working on getting that publicized and getting it out to all of the groups that would need to get noticed, which is quite a lot because this is basically a master plan that covers the entire county.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
It's going to be a long night.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be quick. Okay, so thank you, Ms. Dunn. Now we have legislative session day 11. This is an introduction for Bill 1621, Environmental Sustainability, Building Energy Use Benchmarking and Performance Standards Amendments. Lead sponsor is the Council President at the request of the County Executive. Public hearing is scheduled for June 15th at 1:30 p.m. Ms. McCartney-Green, do you have anything to add? Did I leave anything out? Okay, great. We good? I got a thumbs up. On mute. Okay, good.
Yes, thumbs up. Thank you, Council President.
All right, that bill is introduced. We look forward to thinking about it in June. Colleagues, anything else? If not, we are adjourned 2 minutes early.